On January 17, 1961, Patrice Lumumba was no longer the prime minister of an independent nation. He was a prisoner, beaten, bound, and pushed onto an aircraft with his closest allies, Maurice Mpolo and Joseph Okito. Their destination was Katanga, the breakaway province controlled by Lumumba's determined enemies. Belgian officers and advisors were embedded there. The men waiting on the ground did not intend to put him on trial. They intended to make him disappear. Only 7 months earlier, Lumumba had stood before the world as the voice of Congo's independence. Now he was being transported in secret, humiliated, and handed over to people who feared what he represented. Why had Congo's first elected prime minister become so dangerous so quickly? Why did Belgian officials, Congolese rivals, and American strategists all see him as a threat? And why, after his death, would the killers go so far as to destroy his body? Lumumba's story is often told as an African tragedy, but it was also a global struggle over empire, minerals, ideology, and power. To understand why so many forces wanted him silenced, we have to return to the country he tried to lead and the system it was built to serve.
For decades, the Belgian Congo had been organized less like a nation than a machine for extraction. Rubber, copper, cobalt, diamonds, and uranium moved outward. Wealth accumulated in foreign companies and colonial institutions, while most Congolese people remained excluded from political power. The system produced roads, mines, and administrative centers, but almost no preparation for self-government. By the late 1950s, only a small number of Congolese had access to education, senior positions, or experience. Independence was approaching, but the state was not being handed over with stable institutions. It was being released under pressure. Patrice Lumumba rose inside this contradiction. He worked as a postal clerk and later in private business, gaining experience beyond his home region. He was ambitious, persuasive, and capable of speaking across ethnic and provincial divisions. That mattered because Congo was enormous. Its political movements were often rooted in local loyalties, regional interests, or ethnic identity. Lumumba argued for something broader, a united Congo, strong enough to resist foreign control and internal fragmentation. His party, the Congolese National Movement, tried to build a national base rather than a regional one. This made him valuable to supporters and threatening to rivals who benefited from a weaker central government. Congo's independence was therefore never only about replacing one flag with another. The territory contained resources desired by global powers, provinces with competing ambitions, and institutions still tied to Belgium. When Lumumba demanded sovereignty, he was challenging more than colonial rule. He was challenging the system built around Congo's wealth.
On June 30th, 1960, Congo became independent. The ceremony was meant to present a controlled transfer of power, dignified, orderly, and generous. Belgium's King Baudouin praised the colonial mission and invoked King Leopold II, the ruler whose brutal exploitation had shaped Congo's earliest colonial history. Then Patrice Lumumba rose to speak. His address was not part of the carefully managed script. He rejected the idea that independence had been offered as a gift. He spoke instead of forced labor, humiliation, racial insults, unequal laws, and the violence Congolese people had endured. Freedom, he insisted, had been won through struggle. The room changed instantly. To many Congolese listeners, Lumumba gave language to memories the ceremony was trying to soften. He was not simply criticizing Belgium. He was claiming the right to define Congo's history from the viewpoint of those who had lived under colonial rule. To Belgian officials and cautious Western observers, the speech sounded confrontational. It suggested that Lumumba would not accept independence if it meant preserving the old system behind a new flag. The political break, he was saying, had to be real. That speech did not by itself seal his fate, but it exposed the conflict that would define the months ahead. Belgium wanted influence to survive. Foreign companies wanted stability around Congo's resources. Lumumba wanted sovereignty strong enough to resist both pressure and division. On the day Congo celebrated its freedom, the battle over what that freedom actually meant had already begun. And Lumumba had made one thing clear. He would not remain silent to keep the ceremony comfortable for those seated around him.
Independence lasted less than a week before the new state began to fracture. On July 5th, Congolese soldiers mutinied against Belgian officers who still controlled the army's command. Violence spread, European civilians fled, and Belgium sent troops back into Congo, officially to protect its citizens, but without the approval of Lumumba's government. Then came a greater threat. Katanga, Congo's mineral-rich province, declared independence under Moise Tshombe. Belgian officers, advisors, and business interests helped sustain the breakaway state. Soon, South Kasai separated. The country Lumumba had fought to unite was being pulled apart almost immediately after freedom. Lumumba and President Joseph Kasavubu appealed to the United Nations. UN forces arrived, but their mission had limits. They were prepared to pressure Belgium to withdraw and prevent wider war. They were not willing to become Lumumba's army and crush Katanga by force. To Lumumba, neutrality looked like surrender. Every day Katanga remained outside government control. Congo lost territory, revenue, and authority. He demanded stronger action. When Western governments refused, he turned to the Soviet Union for aircraft, vehicles, and logistical support. That decision transformed the crisis. Lumumba saw Soviet assistance as a tool to preserve Congo's unity. In Washington and Brussels, it looked like the beginning of a communist takeover in the heart of Africa. Whether Lumumba was aligned with Moscow mattered less than what powerful officials believed. His options were narrowing. Belgium was intervening. Provinces were breaking away. The United Nations would not fight his war. The army was unstable. His rivals were gathering strength. In trying to save Congo from collapse, Lumumba had stepped into a global conflict far larger than his government. From that moment, his enemies no longer saw him only as a difficult prime minister. They began to see him as a threat that had to be removed.
By late summer 1960, Congo was no longer viewed in Washington as a distant colonial crisis. American officials feared that Soviet access to the country's resources, airfields, and political influence could alter the balance of power across Africa. Lumumba, increasingly desperate for support, became the center of that fear. Behind closed doors, the United States approved covert efforts to remove him from power. CIA officers funded political opponents, encouraged anti-Lumumba alliances, and searched for leaders considered more reliable. Even darker proposals were discussed. Poison was prepared for a possible assassination operation, although that plan was never carried out. This distinction matters. The United States did not fire the bullets that killed Lumumba, but American officials had already decided that his survival in power was unacceptable. Belgium reached a similar conclusion for different reasons. Lumumba threatened its remaining influence, challenged the secession of mineral-rich Katanga, and refused to behave like a dependent leader. Congolese rivals also had their own ambitions, fears, and grievances. These forces did not operate as one perfectly coordinated machine. They overlapped because each saw Lumumba as an obstacle. Then Joseph Désiré Mobutu stepped forward. Once close to Lumumba, the young army chief presented himself as the man who could end the political chaos. President Kasavubu dismissed Lumumba. Lumumba dismissed Kasavubu in return. Parliament resisted choosing between them. Mobutu used the deadlock as his opening. Backed by military force and encouraged by foreign support, he announced that politicians would be neutralized. Lumumba was placed under guard, cut off from government, and surrounded by enemies. The man who had spoken for Congolese sovereignty was now trapped inside his own capital. Powerful men abroad were already shaping that final answer. And the question was no longer whether he would return to power, it was whether he would be allowed to live. After being confined under guard in Leopoldville, Lumumba understood that remaining there meant political death. His supporters were regrouping in Stanleyville, hundreds of miles away, and he believed reaching them could restore his authority. In late November 1960, he slipped past surveillance and began the journey east. He did not make it. Mobutu's soldiers captured him near the Sankuru River. Photographs and reports of his arrest showed the former prime minister bound, beaten, and publicly humiliated. He was taken first to military custody, then moved between detention sites as his enemies debated what to do with him. Keeping Lumumba alive was dangerous. He still commanded loyalty. A trial could give him a platform. Imprisonment could turn him into a symbol. And if his supporters rescued him, the political balance might shift again. The solution was transfer. On January 17, 1961, Lumumba was flown with Maurice Mpolo and Joseph Okito to Katanga, the secessionist province whose leaders considered him their greatest enemy. During the flight and after landing, the prisoners were beaten. Belgian officers and officials were present within the machinery that delivered them into Katangi's hands. That night, Lumumba, Mpolo, and Okito were driven to an isolated location and executed by firing squad. The killing was hidden from the public, and false explanations were circulated to delay discovery. But secrecy required more than silence. The bodies were later dug up, cut apart, and destroyed with acid. The goal was not only to conceal evidence, it was to prevent Lumumba from having a grave, a place where mourning could become protest and memory could become resistance. Almost nothing remained. Decades later, a tooth retained by a Belgian officer became the most notorious surviving relic and was returned to Lumumba's family in 2022. His killers believed that destroying the body would end the story. Instead, the absence of a grave made Lumumba larger than any monument. They had eliminated the prisoner, but they had created a martyr whose name could no longer be confined to Congo. Lumumba's death did not solve Congo's crisis. It exposed how fragile independence could be when a new state remained trapped between former colonial powers, internal rivalries, commercial interests, and the demands of the Cold War. Belgium had formally surrendered control, but it still wanted influence over Congo's politics, military, and mineral wealth. The United States feared that Soviet involvement might turn the country into a strategic base in Africa. Congolese rivals saw Lumumba as a threat to their own authority, regional ambitions, or survival. The United Nations, committed to neutrality and divided by international pressure, proved unable to protect the Prime Minister of the government it had entered Congo to assist. Lumumba was not perfect. He could be impatient, confrontational, and politically reckless. But he understood something many leaders around him refused to admit. A nation could raise a new flag and still remain dependent on foreign power. For him, independence meant control over territory, resources, institutions, and decisions. That made him dangerous to anyone who preferred Congo weak, divided, or obedient. After his murder, the men who removed him did not create stability. Mobutu eventually seized power and ruled for decades as a Western-backed anti-communist strongman. Congo remained wealthy beneath the ground and vulnerable above it. Lumumba, meanwhile, became more powerful in death than he had been during his brief time in office. Across Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas, his name became a symbol of betrayed independence and the unfinished struggle against empire. That is why this story reaches far beyond African history. It is a story about what happens when local freedom collides with global power. It is about governments that speak of sovereignty while deciding which foreign leaders may survive. Lumumba's killers tried to erase his body because they feared a grave could become a rallying point. They failed. No grave was needed. Patrice Lumumba became the question they could not bury. Can a nation be free if powerful outsiders still decide its future? Subscribe to the channel and like the video for more stories about the people, betrayals, and hidden forces that changed world history.